As of writing this, the new Elden Ring DLC is yet to drop. But like the rest of you PvP nerds, I am eagerly waiting to try out the 8 new weapon classes that were promised. To that end, I've been putting time into thinking about how I would pick up new weapons and playstyles for the first time when the DLC does drop. Out of the urge to codify how to pick up a new weapon in this game comes this guide. I will be talking you through the process of picking up new weapons from start to finish, from the absolute basics to honing and optimizing a mature playstyle. I'm going to be focusing on how to find weapon-specific tactics and largely ignoring teaching fundamental skills. Instead, I'm going to assume that you know some of the basic fundamentals of the game, like spacing and roll catching. If you feel like you need to work on those skills, I do have a video about spacing, and I plan to do more content in the future. One of the greatest struggles someone can have is figuring out what weapon they want to use. So we're not going to cover that here. I'm going to assume that you've already picked out a setup that you want for whatever reason you want to use it, and that you're going to try to develop a playstyle for it. Just make sure that it's something that you're going to enjoy using. To actually start this, first things first, you need a build, and it doesn't need to be anything fancy. Assume you're going to remake that build at least a few times once you understand your needs better, and this will come with time and experience with a weapon, so you don't have to get it right on the first try. You will know what you need to do, just pay attention to your problem areas. Do you need more damage, defense, stamina, poise? And what are you willing to trade to get that? Just keep that in the back of your mind. All you want to do now is hit the poise and health break points and then pump the rest into damage. 58 vigor is a minimum, 88 poise is a minimum, you can go up to 110, and then just use this chart for optimal rings. There are also a bunch of great build making resources out there, and I'll link them in the description. With the build out of the way, we can start looking at the weapon. I usually start my process by finding the standout moves on a weapon. Those are moves that have exceptional speed, range, hyper armor, or any combination of those three. Some weapons may be made viable using just one of their attacks if it's good enough. Think Serpent Hunter and Power Stance Great Spears with their phenomenal crouch attacks. Other setups rely on more of their movesets. Think Power Stance Katanas that mix between nearly all of their moves, barring a couple. What I want you to think about now is why some setups can get away with just using one move, and others seem to need to use their entire moveset. This is because each move has a purpose, and in the case of those one-move playstyles, that one move can serve, or has to serve, all purposes. You'll want to find an attack that can reliably whiff punish. This is how you land hits using spacing. You'll want to find a move that can roll catch out of a pressure sequence, and can be used for chase down. And you'll want a move that can act as a get-off-me tool, something that makes it too dangerous for the opponent to stay in your face for an extended period of time. These three are what we are looking for in whatever weapon we choose to pick up, and these rules can be filled by one or multiple distinct attacks. The bare minimum for a weapon to work is a get-off-me tool and a whiff punish tool, or a way to get damage and a way to avoid damage. From the previews section, we know what moves we are probably going to be hitting our opponents with, our standout moves, and we roughly know the scenarios in which we're going to land that move, at least the most common scenarios in neutral. With that info in hand, I'm going to skip teaching neutral and go straight to advantage state. This will make more sense later. Once you land a hit, if you guess or react to your opponent's next move and respond to it appropriately, you're going to be able to continue the advantage state, aka you land another hit. If you're wrong, then they may get away, or worse, you may get hit yourself. Luckily, if you break down your options beforehand and know the outcomes of every common interaction, you can make informed decisions in the moment. To explain this, let's break down something simple, landing a single R1 with a sham sphere in a mirror match. On screen is a decision matrix that details every action that is reasonable for you to do out of landing a hit, and all actions that are reasonable for your opponent to do out of getting hit. This is by no means exhaustive. How those two interactions intersect is color-coded, and everything is from the perspective of the person landing the hit first. With that, green means you land another hit, yellow means that your opponent will regain a neutral position, or you trade, red means that you get hit by your opponent and reverse the advantage state, and magenta means that no one really gets hit, but you still maintain an advantageous position. The decision matrix assumes both players are acting on muscle memory alone and are not reacting to what the other is doing. This means most 50-50s found using this method don't actually force a 50-50. Instead, if the opponent reacts, they can nearly always reaction roll to neutral and avoid taking damage. Additionally, if the opponent is able to avoid getting hit without rolling, they are likely able to get a counter hit, reversing the advantage. True 50-50s do exist, but require both parties choosing an action before they can react to whatever the other one is doing. The most common of these 50-50s is R1 out of hit stun. To make this more visible, I've simplified the decision matrix. As you can see, resetting neutral and whiff punishing, and doing a second R1 then rolling, all clearly punish R1 out of hit stun. Block canceling another R1 also punishes, but it is inconsistent since it depends on which frame you hit the first R1 with. None of these can be done on reaction to seeing your opponent press R1. They all need to be done after predicting that the opponent will R1 out of hit stun. If you predict wrong and your opponent rolls, you will not get your punish. The opponent will return to neutral, but you aren't going to take damage either. On the other hand, if you predict that they will panic roll, you can choose an action from the matrix that will punish panic roll and use it. These actions usually come with some risk that you will get hit if they are one of hit stun, but it is necessary if you want to continue the advantage state. This style of matrix can also be used to show why hyper armor is so hard to pressure. R1 out of hit stun punishes every aggressive option that would roll catch. Every defensive option that punishes R1 out of hit stun allows the opponent to escape to neutral. Disadvantage doesn't really exist for hyper armor weapons because of this reason. A pattern that you may be picking up on is there is nearly always multiple actions you can take to punish your opponent's actions. In that case, which one do you choose? Well, there are three schools of thought here. The first school is you pick an action that will wield the greatest damage or frame advantage. In this situation, we are going to continue to assume the opponent is going to panic roll after getting hit by an R1. Running R1, R2, and a delayed R1 for roll catch all can punish that. Now we look at the simplified decision matrices for all those moves. What we find is that the running R2 has a lot more advantage compared to all the other moves that you could hit them with. So you choose running R2. That is also completely ignoring all the downsides of the running R2, like it being slower and having a lot more end lag. Also, if you're doing a delayed R1, you can option select and roll if they counterattack themselves. But still, you can't ignore the fact that running R2 into R1 cannot be interrupted by hyper armor, which is a massive advantage in certain matchups. The other school of thought is just to pick a safe option that is the hardest to react to. Shamshar R1-2 comes out in 13 frames, making it nearly unreactable, and running R1 closes a lot of distance in 15 frames. These actions test the opponent's reaction time and awareness and often tend to lead to stray hits. It also can condition the opponent into acting prematurely or in prediction to what you will do next, so that we can punish that later. The final school of thought is to use an action that maintains some maximum safety for yourself. This means often ignoring your predictions and choosing an action that will always keep you safe. In the case for Shamshir, resetting to neutral will always be the safest option, as anything that can be done to punish it will also be able to be dodge rolled. This leads to a solid but boring playstyle that relies heavily on spacing to deal damage. Playing like this also can condition your opponent into being complacent with their defensive options, allowing you to pick and choose which bad habits you'd like to punish and when. Additionally, this method can be used to prioritize which moves you want to land in neutral if possible. High priority moves are always better if you want to land them, and they often come with high drawbacks, like being slower or more punishable if you whiff. There are always trade-offs, and it is up to you to figure out what is worth it, or to find the scenarios that guarantee landing your high-risk, high-reward moves. What we just did can be applied to every combination of setup in the game. Axes versus katanas, straight swords versus whips, hammers versus colossal swords, anything, including hyper armor setups. However, most of what is in the decision matrix will become intuition over time, rendering it redundant. But before that intuition is formed, it is an awesome tool to understand matchups, and it is still worth revisiting if you're struggling with a matchup. Make one of these matrices for common interactions that occur and see which decisions you could make or improve. You can also use these matrices when figuring out what the optimal Ash of War is for a weapon. Look what happens when we add Sword Dance to Shamshir. R1 in a Sword Dance is a war crime. On Shamshir, it covers every action except Reaction Roll and Strafe. It does this because Hyper Armor starts up before the opponent can attack out, and then the attack frames perfectly line up to hit panic rolls. Remember that frame 13-second R1? Now that makes for a true 50-50 unless you can tell the difference between the second R1 and the startup of Sword Dance in 13 frames. The only way to punish it is to strafe. The problem with that is that it's inconsistent, you often get clipped anyways, and on top of that, strafing into your opponent is a terrible idea if they choose anything other than doing Sword Dance. Other less nefarious combos that work out well is Flaming Strike on a two-handed poke halberd. Strafing counters nearly everything on that weapon, and Flaming Strike hits people who are strafing. It leads to a more solid setup. The idea is that you have a gap in a weapon's defenses or offenses, and Ash of War can fill that gap. Conversely, a really good Ash of War can be redundant on a weapon if it's already covered by that weapon's normal moveset. Now I want to pivot and talk about methods of practice. As you're learning a new weapon, one of the fastest ways to improve is by focusing on your accuracy. Accuracy is what percentage of mistakes that your opponent make that lead to punishes from you. The goal is 1 mistake equals 1 punish. And if we want to extend that out, 1 punish should lead to an advantage state, which leads to death for your opponent, all in one interaction. 100% accuracy is unrealistic, especially an advantage state which relies on 50-50s, but it is a concrete goal to reach towards. The best way to practice accuracy is to go into the arena and fight randoms and see how fast you can kill them. While doing this, attempt to punish every mistake that they make, and pay attention to why you missed certain punishes, and figure out how you could have done it differently in the future. This not only is amazing practice for your accuracy, but it will also show you what spaces you need to be in to get punishes, and how to optimize your spacing on top of your aggression game. Randoms are also great to figure out what your weapon can even punish, and they have a great habit of showing you mistakes that you probably didn't even know were possible. More or less, when your opponent gets away with something stupid, you need to think of ways of hitting them for it. In many ways, the only difference between the best player in the world and the arena random is the number of mistakes that they make in a match. Everyone makes mistakes, so fighting players who make a lot of them with high accuracy will also allow you to develop the muscle memory for when you fight players who only make a handful of errors in the entire match. Fighting players who are better than you is also great practice, but maybe not in the ways you might think. Until you get close to them in skill level, they are simply there to show you the mistakes that you didn't know you were making, and to show you how to punish those mistakes you otherwise couldn't figure out how to counter on your own. Once you have all this down, where do we want to look for improvements now? Improving your spacing is always an option, but that's going to occur in the background already, and it's kind of hard to teach individual weapon spacing, because it becomes so diverse and complex. To stay on theme with our advantage state first approach, I advise you to look for means to optimize and increase the amount of reaction inputs into your playstyle. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is you're going to look for options that allow you to, on reaction, divert to a different option if you're incorrect in your original assumption. For example, you may land an R1 with a Shamshir and automatically go into the second R1. At this point, if you react to your opponent swinging out of hit stun, you can roll. If you don't, you've already pressed the B button, you can run forward and go for a roll catch. In both situations, you press the B button immediately. Then you react and see whether you need to release it immediately or transfer into a run. What this does is it skews the 50-50 in your favor. Either you react to the option and dodge out, which means you don't get hit and it's a neutral interaction, or you react to them panic rolling, and you get the roll catch. So there's really no downside if you execute properly. And these are the situations we really want to look for, where we can add our own reactions into these 50-50s to skew the game theory in our favor. In these interactions, you are in the driver's seat. You can only have, at worst, a neutral interaction where no one gets hit. And at best, you can gain another hit and gain advantage. And most weapons have them, they just need to be found. This also works for neutral interactions like spacing, where you need to option select rolling if they do, say, a running attack, and turning around in R1ing when they whiff an R1. To find scenarios like this, you may need to swap out running versus rolling to get the reactions fast enough, and other stuff like that, where you do these tiny little optimizations to make it possible to react to scenarios you otherwise wouldn't be able to. I'm going to leave most of this up to your own creativity, because most of these are very weapon specific, and finding them will take some time. And I think that's a wrap. There is a lot that I could not cover in a video like this, but I think this is a good start. Many skills are universal, and once you learn them on one weapon, others will follow. It goes the same with the skill of picking up weapons. Once you learn how to pick up one, you should be able to pick up a bunch more pretty easy. I hope you all enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.